Can you seal exposed aggregate concrete? The answer is yes, you can seal exposed aggregate, and it's highly recommended. Exposed aggregate concrete is a decorative way, a nice way of finishing concrete. Rather than having just a plain look, you expose the very top layer of the aggregate, and it gives the concrete a nice rugged look. Depending on the aggregate you have, it gives the concrete, different colors, jazzes it up a bit if you like. So, nice way to finish exterior concrete, but you definitely need to seal it, remembering that concrete itself is very porous, it's naturally porous, and you want to stop chemicals, you want to stop salt, you want to stop mold and mildew, you want to stop moisture getting into that concrete. You obviously don't want to have it stained, and sealing it will protect the exposed aggregate. It'll give it much longer life, it'll stop what we call pop-outs, and it will also enhance the concrete and the aggregate, giving it more color, more of a wet look. What happens if you don't seal exposed aggregate concrete? Well, remembering exposed aggregate concrete and concrete itself is naturally porous, if you don't seal it, then it's going to be open to contamination, it's going to be open to staining. You have the potential for ingress of salt, moisture, de-icing salts, or even chlorides from the atmosphere if you're around the coast. And that moisture, if it gets into the concrete, if you're in a cold climate, you can get what's called freeze-thaw, where it expands and contracts, and it can break down the concrete, it can cause cracking, it can weaken the surface, the binder, if you like, that's holding that exposed aggregate, and you get what's called pop-out. The aggregate itself will pop out of the top surface. So if you don't seal it, you're risking staining, damage from freeze-thaw and from chemical and attack, as well as unsightly things like mold and mildew. It also makes it much more difficult to maintain and clean if you don't seal the concrete. If the chemicals, if the dirt can get into the surface, it's much harder to clean that off if you don't seal the concrete. How do you maintain exposed aggregate concrete? Well, the first point is that you need to seal that concrete. The concrete itself is very porous, it's absorbent, naturally porous, so we need to seal off that concrete, stop water and moisture entering into the concrete, causing things like freeze-thaw damage or cracking. Also, you want to protect against staining. Oil stains, motor oil stains, brake fluid, things like that if you're using it on a driveway, for example. So very important to seal. And when you seal the concrete, that's going to make it much easier to maintain. You should be able to use things like pressure washing, not heavy duty pressure washing, but a light pressure washer to remove soils and dirt that are now not soaking into the concrete, but are just sitting on the surface and are much easier to remove. You don't need to use harsh chemicals. It's not necessary to use strong acids or strong alkalines, degreasers like that. Dilute those products. Generally, a mildly alkaline cleaner is fine to use on a sealed exposed aggregate surface. A good sealer should last 2 to 3 years. So after that time, it may not be necessary to pressure wash if the sealer itself is just dull and faded. If you use a compatible sealer, you should be able to reseal without removing the existing. So figure on about every 2 to 3 years. If you're using a water-based sealer or something like a urethane sealer, which is a much tougher sealer than an acrylic, should give you 2 to 3 years. What is the best type of concrete sealer to use on an exposed aggregate surface? Well, there's two main choices you have. One is to use what's called a penetrating sealer that soaks into the concrete, into the exposed aggregate. And then the other one is a topical sealer that will leave a thin film on the surface. The topical sealer will provide generally some kind of enhancement. It will bring out the color, it will darken the concrete, it'll bring out the color of the aggregate. So visually you'll see a difference with a topical sealer versus a penetrating sealer. A penetrating sealer, as the name suggests, soaks in. It doesn't generally change the appearance, and the very top surface is open. and it's breathable. There's nothing really to lift and peel, and it doesn't typically change the characteristics of the concrete. It won't make it more slippery. So you have those two choices. Then you also need to check to see what sealer has been used previously. It's important to, where you can, use sealers that are compatible with each other. So if a penetrating sealer has been used previously, it's best to go back with another penetrating sealer. Similarly, if you have a solvent-based sealer, then you need to be careful you don't go back with a water-based sealer, because they will reject each other or repel each other. They're incompatible. So you have to make a choice then of stripping and removing the solvent-based sealer if you want to continue forward with a water-based sealer, which is much more environmentally friendly, less moisture sensitive, and generally longer lasting. In terms of penetrating sealers, we have choices, ones that are just water resistant, something like our Pen 50, which is very moisture resistant, mold and mildew resistant. And then we have products like our premium penetrating sealer, which is not only water and salt resistant, but it's also very stain resistant. So it's going to resist motor oil, brake fluid, food-based stains, animal or pet type stains. So you have some good choices with the penetrating sealers. And then on the topical side, we have what's called acrylics, which are one part. They're easier to use, they dry faster. Something like our AC 450 is a good acrylic stain resistant sealer that you can use on exposed aggregate. But if you want a longer lasting premium type sealer, topical sealer, then we recommend our Strong Seal Wet Look. This is a concentrated water-based polyurethane sealer, and it's a two-part that you mix together, and those two components cross-link, form a much tougher resin on the surface of your exposed aggregate concrete, and you'll get much longer durability, you'll get better stain resistance, and it should be easier to clean for a much longer period. What do professionals use when sealing exposed aggregate concrete? Well, they're going to use a sealer that first of all is not moisture sensitive, something that can be applied to a concrete and they don't have to worry about it blushing or turning what we call water white in the presence of moisture. Something that has a high polymer content, right? The off-the-shelf big box sealers typically are lower cost, and the way you lower the cost of a sealer is to put less polymer in it, less resin if you like, and that will directly affect the long-term performance of that sealer. It'll also likely to be a softer type resin that will absorb moisture and more likely to blush and water white. So make sure you're using a high polymer content, high hard wearing acrylic or polyurethane sealer. The polyurethanes professionals like because they're much more durable. They're a two-part that you mix together. They're a little bit more tricky to apply, but they give much better performance. They are available in a water-based formulation, something like our Strong Seal Wet Look, and can be applied after mixing using a pump-up sprayer or a roller. And those two-part water-based really do bring out the colors of the aggregate and enhance the concrete, but still provide something that's not moisture sensitive. In some cases with the Strong Seal Plus or the Strong Seal Wet Look, you can apply soon after you've pressure washed the surface. So that is a big advantage to a pro, that after he's cleaned and prepared the surface, he doesn't have to wait 24 hours before applying the water-based sealer. That would be like the Strong Seal Wet Look. How do you prepare exposed aggregate for sealing? Well, it's first to make sure that the concrete itself is absorbent. There's nothing on the surface like retarding agents, curing agents that may prevent the sealer from adhering or absorbing into the concrete. Often when you prepare or produce exposed aggregate, they're using retarding agents, so it's easier to clean off the very top layer of the concrete to expose the aggregate. That's how it's done professionally. They use a retarding agent That makes it easier to brush off or sponge off the concrete surface and expose that aggregate. You also need to wait at least 28 days before you seal it. You want to make sure that the concrete is fully hardened, the moisture is out of the concrete as much as possible, and if there's any cracks or issues like that, you can fix them first before you seal the concrete. Then you want to make sure it's clean. When you're sealing it, you don't want to seal in any efflorescence or stains that may be there, so make sure you clean those off prior to sealing. So if you follow those key steps, you should be in a good position to seal your concrete. Make sure it's absorbent, no barrier, make sure any contaminants have been cleaned off the top, and make sure you've waited at least 28 days before you seal. How long does a good quality sealer last on exposed aggregate? How long a sealer lasts, a good quality sealer will mean something like our premium that has a high polymer content, or in terms of a topical sealer, our strong seal wet look, which again is a highly concentrated sealer that you dilute down before you apply it. You want to use something that has good polymer content, otherwise you're getting performance for maybe 1 to 2 years before you have to reapply. The sealer will weather, or when you clean it, it will be removed, or it can peel and delaminate because it's breaking down because of UV exposure, or because it's starting to absorb moisture and soften. So polymer content is very important. We prefer or recommend that you use water-based sealers. They're much less sensitive to moisture, particularly during application, and they're also much safer and environmentally friendly. You don't have to worry about flammability. You don't have to worry about pollution and fumes and that in the air. They're also safer to use around pets and around your lawn or grass areas. So a good quality penetrating sealer can last up to 5 years. That, remember, is in the concrete rather than on the surface, so there's nothing really there to lift or peel. A good quality topical sealer, something like the Strong Seal Wet Look, you're looking around 3 years, and then you'd want to come back and reapply another 1 or 2 coats to bring back that enhancement and color. What tools or equipment are needed to apply a good quality exposed aggregate sealer? Well, it's important not to apply the sealer too thick if you're using a topical sealer, something that's going to enhance the concrete, the exposed aggregate, and bring out the color. So a pump-up sprayer is what we recommend as a good way of putting a thin layer of sealer onto the concrete, letting that dry, and then applying another layer. Typically 2 layers, 2 applications are better than applying 1 heavy coat. You want the exposed aggregate to be able to breathe. A lot of times we're using this outside exterior applications, and we want to make sure that the concrete itself can breathe. So thin layers. Roller application is also another way of applying it, but remember the surface is rugged, rough textured surface, so be careful to make sure that the sealer itself doesn't pond or puddle, because when it dries, that can leave a foaming effect or a whitish layer on your concrete. So if you're going to use a roller, be very careful about applying it too heavy. A professional will actually have a soft broom or brush to brush away any sealer that's puddled in an area. So just a soft bristle broom or brush is a good tip, a good way of brushing out excess sealer, whether you spray apply it or whether you roller apply it. When it comes to applying penetrating sealers, you are trying to get a good application into the concrete, into the exposed aggregate. So you typically apply that in a heavier application, and you're looking for it to soak in within 10 or 15 minutes. So if you're seeing again that the penetrating sealer hasn't all soaked in, then you would brush or broom that away into an area so that it is soaking in fully. If it soaks in very quickly, again I'm talking about a penetrating sealer, say within 5 minutes, I might tell you then that you need to come back and apply a second coat of that penetrating sealer. And what you're looking for is you reach a point where the concrete's rejecting the sealer. It won't soak in anymore after about 10 minutes. Once a concrete sealer has been applied, how do you clean and maintain the exposed surface. Well, the fact that you've sealed the concrete, the exposed aggregate concrete, now should make it much easier to clean. It should be rejecting and repelling any contaminants getting into the concrete, and dirt and debris shouldn't stick easily to the concrete now. So pressure washing, but not at a high pressure. Just use like a fan as opposed to a pencil tip to wash away any dirt or contaminants. Scrubbing or agitating with, again, a soft bristle or soft brush or broom, deck brush is all you need to do. It's not necessary to have harsh chemicals, right? The dirt, the staining, shouldn't be dealing with that. So using mildly alkaline cleaners, something like our Surface Clean is good, or you can use microbial cleaners like the CoverClean AE or the HC if you're dealing with motor oil, petroleum-based type oils. For example, if you're on a driveway or a plaza deck and you want to clean off oil and brake fluid, that type of thing. So don't use harsh chemicals, don't use acidic chemicals, nothing highly abrasive, so you don't damage the sealer or you don't damage the concrete itself. How do you fix or repair patchy exposed aggregate concrete? Well, the first point to make is if you use a good sealer, you can prevent a lot of this cracking and patchiness, or what we call pop out, when the aggregate itself pops out of the concrete. If you use a good sealer, that's going to seal out the water and the moisture getting into the concrete. It's going to stop what's called freeze thaw attack. It's going to stop the concrete dusting, harden the concrete around the aggregate so that it doesn't pop out of the surface. But if you are faced with that, then you can repair. You can use adhesives like Concrete Mender. These are clear concrete repair products that you place into the concrete, into the patch area, and then you replace the exposed aggregate gravel or pea gravel, and that adhesive will lock it in place. Or you can actually use surface repair products, cementitious based, and again push back in some aggregate and brush or cleanse off the resurfacer to again expose. So it's a little bit more of an art than a science, but there are ways using concrete menders, using repair products to fix cracks and spalls in an exposed aggregate concrete. But again, remember, prevention is better than cure, so sealing it with a good, long-lasting quality sealer will prevent those problems in the first place. Does power washing remove an exposed aggregate sealer? You need to be careful when you're pressure washing exposed aggregate that you don't damage the sealer. So you don't want to be using a pressure washer that has a pencil tip. You want to be using what we call a fan tip, and you're washing off the contaminants. Remembering sealing the concrete should make it much easier to keep it clean. So avoid pencil tip. Don't hold the pressure washer tip close to the surface of the concrete. You should try and be about 12 to 18 inches away, and then use a fan tip. And really you're washing off the contaminants rather than trying to cut into the surface. What's the most cost-effective way to seal an exposed aggregate concrete driveway or patio area, any exterior concrete? Remember, this is a textured, rugged-looking surface now, so if you're using a topical sealer, it's important not to apply it in a thick coat, right? Clear sealers need to go down in thin coats. So I like to recommend using a pump-up sprayer, a low-pressure spray, and apply in thin coats, thin, quick-drying coats. 2 coats are typical, letting the first coat dry thoroughly before you apply the second coat. Now, if you're using a penetrating sealer, little different approach. Here you want to work in smaller sections and flood the concrete so that the penetrating sealer soaks in. And you're looking for that to soak in within 10 to 15 minutes. After 10 to 15 minutes, you still see sealer on the surface, penetrating sealer, then you need to brush or broom that out using a soft bristle broom. If that penetrating sealer disappears into the surface within, say, 5 minutes, that's telling you it's very absorbent and that you need to come back with a second coat. Again, pump up spraying, low pressure spraying the sealer makes that application easier over a larger surface area versus using a roller. But you can use a roller. Just keep in mind you're probably going to end up applying more material that way.